Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. On this one we usually talk about all things how you can build artificial intelligence based system intelligently and then also be selling them to your first clients in your local region. In this particular tutorial though, we are building an agentic AI software for business development and bid managers. Basically, these are these people and professionals that go on public platforms from governments and basically check if there's a contract they can bid on with their particular enterprise. It is generally speaking a fairly cumbersome and manual process, and this particular prototype should solve the problem for them to get more deals done and also do less of the heavy lifting. Before we get started, my name is Cyril, and on this channel we both have a podcast and these tutorials, so definitely stay tuned for many more of these types of tutorials. Without any coding experience, again, you can be building agentic AI systems. I'm already displaying the screen here, so let me jump quickly on my MacBook. What we're basically using, generally speaking, for these tutorials, there are different types of vibe coding tools out there. You might have heard about Lovable, you might have heard about Cursor, which is a little bit more an advanced one, or Replit, but I'm actually using Vercel V0, just in my opinion, based on many hundreds of hours of prototyping and building AI systems. It's probably the best and the most state of the art, especially if you want to be selling your solutions to businesses. If you might use Replit or Lovable, this is more a B2C or business to customer builder, and this particular one, in my opinion at least, is a little bit more focused for B2B clients, where many cases also the money lies. In this particular instance, again, we're building a vertical SaaS agent for procurement and bid managers. I already have the prompt here. You'll also find the prompt for free completely in the description. And basically, we're also saying it, and that is a little bit of a hack if you're building on these vibe coding tools, which stack it should use. In this particular example, we say to the AI agent, please use Typescript. The backend will be orchestrated in Java Springboot. There is many backend languages, but usually Java Springboot is a fairly state-of-the-art, fairly scalable and secure language, Springboot being the framework. And then more importantly, just for the AI, we need to tell it what exactly is it we want it to be built. Before I actually go through these features, I already shoot it off, and then I can quickly reread all the components and all the features the AI engine should be able to do in the first place. Again, you don't have to know any particular coding to actually be making that work in the first place, which is truly awesome. With Vercel V0, it's also getting better probably every single reiteration of release when a new Claude model came out, because most likely these guys are using an array of Claude models by Anthropic. But bringing it back to the product, what is it exactly we want to build? Once again, these bid managers, generally speaking, their workflow is they go to a public website where these tenders and these public offerings are displayed. So that's really the first point of action. In my particular country, which is Switzerland, there is something called CMAP. So CMAP is basically the public domain of government contracts being issued. So there's, for example, all these types of contracts like services or designs, for example. You can also select by location, again, being Switzerland only. The contracting authority, for example, there is many different jurisdictions in Switzerland. So in your country, there might be provinces. In the States, there might be states in the first place. And there might be some other filters. If we search here, for example, on this particular search feature, usually we would get some feedback. But let's see, for example, IT services. As you can see, this is the most state-of-the-art platform. Sometimes, depending on the country, it's a little bit slow, it's a little bit cumbersome. In Switzerland, it's fairly advanced, but in some other countries, it might not be that advanced in the first place, which again is a huge business opportunity. Basically, here is just a list, an array of public tenders you can go through. You'll see, for example, what is the current state and so on and so forth. So we don't have to go too much into detail, just that you get an intuition. It's fairly a manual process. You can click through these publications, and then there's a bunch of legal terms, what they maybe need, and all the categorization, again, really depends on the country, and so on and so forth. So you also see, for example, the dates and additional documentation where you can download. You might need to register for that. The bid manager, generally speaking, without going too much into detail, these people, these professionals would go to these websites. They will check if something makes sense for them, and if it does make sense for them, they're initiating the bid process, which is exactly where the AI agent that we're building in comes in basically. So let me quickly check back to our agent. Of course, it's still ongoing and it's still fetching the components. But back to the product features again, you now saw the procurement platform, generally speaking. So ideally, there should be an integration by this agentic system to the procurement platform. So there has to be some sort of API call where we can get the data on this particular platform and it's injected into our software here. And ideally, that should be done maybe on a daily basis, maybe on a bi-daily basis, or even on an hourly basis. Depending on the context where you actually be building this solution potentially for clients, or maybe actually doing consulting, it just depends on the API configurations, meaning if you as an outsider can actually consume the components and the details of this particular procurement website. So that's a little bit to be defined, but that's ideally the case. There should be an automation, again, by the platform, by the AI system, to go to this particular procurement platform and then basically be fetching all this data and putting it in here. A nice thing to do, obviously, as the next logical step would be that a large language model or an AI agent is giving some sort of a score if the company that is potentially bidding on this might be eligible or might actually have the skills. And that's exactly where really the needy and greedy engineering comes in, because you have to make sure that the large language model actually knows what you as an IT company are doing in the first place. So that's a little bit the intuition. Once again, there should be an automation component, and there should be a check by the large language model if this particular contract actually makes sense for the company to then spend hours and hours and hours of organizational work and admin work to then bid on these particular proposals. So that's a little bit the intuition, just that you get a bit of a feel of the actual problem. It's a manual process, it's fairly cumbersome, and these BD/bid manager professionals, they need to do that maybe 3-4 times in a particular week. There should also be a dashboard. Usually when I'm building some prototypes like this, there's always some sort of dashboard where it gives the initial kind of overview of these particular aspects. And before we get into the code that has now been finalized, there should also be an AI analyst chat component. And we'll be spending a little bit of time when we're actually engineering the AI agents on this particular UI. So stay tuned for that particular integration. And then also, again, the AI-powered search is basically what I just mentioned. And very, very importantly, and that's really where the pain is currently. So if you're interested in building this particular platform, or you're doing consulting, is really mostly on the copilot or the generation of the bid, because it has to be coming in a certain legal format. It has to be including many, many references and particular IT framings, and many times this is exactly where many of these bid and business development managers are actually losing many hours just to do that all manually. So this is a really interesting component if we engineer it very smartly. And I have a bit of a caveat later on, and we'll discussing more about this particular Copilot. Again, I also said, please do not build in Versal v0 the Python or the AI component. Otherwise, the code would be fairly too complex. And also, I would like to have some sort of influence which AI models and what type of workflow actually should be coming into this particular front end. Once again, if you engineer that super securely, you might do that in a different way, but for this particular build, it's completely sufficient in the way we will be doing it in the first place. Now, maybe very briefly, what actually Versal v0 now did is exactly what I told it to do. It gave it a name, Procure AI, which is basically pretty cool. We can see all these workflows and on the dashboard. Now, basically, it's our job to then justify all these particular features. Do they make sense? Do they not make sense? And then remove certain elements. I'm mostly interested in the AI analyst chat. It gave us an initial idea how this chat could look like. I don't like it too much, so we need to reiterate a little bit. That's all on the fly here. Then the contract search, once again, I already told it in the prompt, it should use CMAP integration. So we basically are already introducing a few of the contracts it should then get from CMAP. Once again, CMAP being this public database. Ideally, there is some sort of better filtering in place, because most of these public offering places are not the most sophisticated IT websites. So if we can engineer a better filtering or a better categorization mechanism by simply consuming the data, that might also be an interesting feature. As you saw before, when I did a quick jump on the website there, even I struggled to find out these elements. So maybe that is some sort of feature here. Again, AI insights, strong match. That's exactly what we needed. It already gave a a matching score, which of course has to be validated once again. This matching score is hard-coded now, so it needs to be also connected to AI components. Once again, everything we do is here to increase productivity, increase efficiency by our target stakeholder. That's really where everything there is to say about building artificial intelligence-based systems, because we need to have a justification for them to pay for this particular platform. And if she or he, meaning these professionals, do not save time or get more productivity in, it's very difficult to sell any of these systems. Then the last one, the AI proposal copilot, is actually pretty cool. So this should already maybe more or less work. Of course, ideally there should be some sort of content here, title, and then there's an export as PDF. So Versal V0 gave already a pretty good initial, I guess, intuition of how that could look like. We need to iterate probably a few times here over as well, which is not the first priority. The first priority is, as always, let me place myself here into the software quickly, is actually to change the name of from Procure AI to, we call it Focus, or we call it Procure Flow. Please use the logo attached. I just kind of general good practice usually to first identify maybe with the SaaS name in the first place. Of course, you can do any particular name. It really doesn't matter. For me, something with flow usually signifies some sort of improvement on a particular workflow. So we call it Procure Flow here in the first place. While this is loading, the only thing left to say is we need to do a little bit of changes to the UI. And also we need to quickly optimize the UI for performance. So generally good practice if you're building on Versal V0, on Lovable, and on Replit is the following. So you can see here on the top right how many versions we have done, meaning how many times I prompted and how many times the system came back with a new suggestion on how the software should look like. So now we have Procure Flow, we have Procurement Suite, something I actually don't like. Below the name, please remove. For whatever reason, it does that all the time. I just generally don't like it. I just like to see the brand name. What I was talking about is the version control, or the versions, how many times we prompted it and it gave an output in the first place. Generally good practice after every 10 iterations. It's just something I introduce into my workflow. I give it a prompt to go over the entire code and optimize it for quality, for speed, for reliability, and sometimes some security components as well. Because once you're building the software and it's maybe 50, 75 or 100 iterations, it might actually be a little bit more cumbersome in optimizing the software for speed, for reliability, or maybe just for user interface purposes. While I'm building myself further down again, let's quickly focus on this particular component. In the AI Analyst chat, make it state of the art, similar to the ChatGPT chat interface, because this looks a little bit too old school for my liking, at least. Also, I have no idea why there's an online button, but that's usually the vibe coding fashion. You have to go through these elements iteratively and remove most of the stuff the AI agents just came up with, and we need to replace it with the components we would want to do in the first place. Very similarly, like we built front-end components before, or even generally we used Figma for design purposes. Now we just have to do it more manually as well with the AI. Give it a prompt, it will remove it, and then hopefully and ideally looks a little bit better. Now what is missing is the following AI agent components. I already built the template here. I will quickly walk you through these components just step by step. Also, every of these prompts you will find into the description of the video, and it's actually fairly straightforward. The core idea in this particular workflow is we will use n8n, which is an AI agent builder. Once again, similar to Versal V0, there is no coding required to actually set up these large language models for us to have an interface where we can iterate through, for example, chat messages with these very smart large language models / agents. Generally speaking, what we need to do is we have a front-end component, which is the chat interface. So we have to tell the AI, first our Vertical V0 agent, and then also our n8n workflow builder, that every time the user types in a message here, the message from this UI should be sent to n8n and then consumed by the large language model, ideally analyzed, and then being output and sent back to Procure Flow. Let's see how that looks like. Of course, that didn't work. There is an error. Actually, before Vertical V0 was that advanced, these runtime error features were not that particular, really easily resolved. Now it is basically just with one click. If you actually run into one of these errors, it's not that big of a deal, because we'll just basically be saying, fix it with Vertical V0, it goes back, changes the code, and let's see how many times it actually comes back with the error. Ideally, it's just one error, and then we can then be continuing to iterate, which leaves us sufficient time to quickly go through the AI code or the AI workflow that we need to build. Once again, on this particular UI that's now being re-rendered, the user would send a message, and the message would then be sent through an API or a connection to a particular webhook. The way we actually would do that is we will set up the webhook in a sense that you can go through, for example, you can go here through plus and you will choose webhook. In the webhook, there is a few ideas or a few type of configurations you can do. Usually, as I set it up here as already, you would use a post request method in the sense that every time the webhook is sending something, it is sending it here to n8n. So you need to change it from wherever it is. Per default, it's usually get to post. Also, something fairly important already, if you want to set it up like this, is the respond hook is basically, usually by default, it's immediately, but since we actually want to send it back to Vertical V0, you can already be selecting using a response to webhook node, and then it will automatically flow through the webhook, flow through the large language models, and then ideally be sent back to Vertical V0. So you can already use that. Now, the way this usually works is there is the post request webhook URL. That's basically the URL where the message from Vertical V0, meaning the chatbot message, should be sent to n8n. It's a little bit like your internet address or some website address that you can go to. And in this way of mentioning it, it's basically just saying, Vertical V0, please, all the messages you need to send to this particular webhook. And that's pretty much all done for the configuration. You can go back quickly to the canvas. You would have set up ideally the webhook. Let me quickly go back to this particular one. So hopefully that should work now. So yes, it does look a little bit better. We might need to iterate a few more times, but ideally, again, once again, we have a chat functionality and we can send a particular message to the n8n agent. So the way we would do that is we basically just be saying we would copy the URL and we would say in the chat component, in the chat bot of AI analyst chat, I set up a webhook post request. So every time the user is sending a message via the chat box, please send it to the following webhook. So while this is running, I will quickly go back to n8n and then continue briefly to the actual explanations here. Once again, we will receive the message here, and then the next thing we need to set up is ideally there's many different types of configurations you can do on n8n. There's billions of parameters and many tools you can actually be using. But in our simple way of thinking through the chatbot, the first analysis agent is basically assuming that the user will ask fairly specific questions about complex deals. It should first analyze the request. So basically the message from the chatbot will be sent to the analysis agent, and the analysis agent is a large language model. So we need to specify that as well. So let me quickly take that out of the way. I already set it up very briefly. You would have the following feature. You would have, for example, the message. That's basically what's coming from Vertical V0, and you have to just drag it to the prompt as a user message. because it basically will say, okay, actually, large language model, please use the reference of the body message itself. So check what is actually coming through the chatbot, basically. At the same time, as it is common for large language models, you need to have something set up called the system message or the system prompt. Large language models, generally speaking, are generic. That we need to kind of put them into a mood of a particular setting. And that's usually done via a system message, as it is called on n8n, or system prompt, as it is called, generally speaking, in AI. This system prompt, again, I will put for free, of course, into the description. It's basically just saying you are a super professional bid and sales manager or tender manager, and please use some best practices if the person is asking about particular matrices or particular questions, and use legal framing, whatever it is. It's basically setting the stage, setting the mood for, again, the model to be answering the most sophisticated way, or in other words, doing the analysis in the most sophisticated way. What we also need to do is set up the AI in the first place, because now it's basically just a shell that has a prompt, a system prompt in it. There's many different types of large language models that you can choose from. For example, if you go to, again, to just select the model, you may be selecting ChatGPT, you may be selecting a different other model, or you might even be using a router platform. In my particular case, most of the agents we are building, we are using Anthropic Claude models, because generally speaking, they're the best for sophisticated, for example, financial analysis, risk analysis. They're really good in coding. So since our systems usually require some complex analysis or some complex code development, we generally speaking usually use Claude, but just for the sake of this demo, you can use any particular ChatGPT or other large language models of your choice. You would then set it up in a sense of, you would check your credentials on the Claude console, for example, and you would basically be selecting also the large language model. The way we would do that is you can go to your Claude platform, which I'm already logged in. On the left side, there is something called API keys, which I'm not opening for security purposes, but simply on this API key, you can create a new key, copy that particular key, and then simply log yourself in with n8n. And then basically your API calls are then being built to your Claude account. So basically we are using our own Claude, and in your case, ideally you would have an Anthropic Claude account set up here with your API keys, and it's actually fairly straightforward. Then based on that, you can then be simply selecting a different array of models. While, for example, the build here is still running, let me quickly see what is already happening. I will quickly check if this particular one is already working. Then I can quickly introduce the next components. Let's execute the workflow, and we can go back and we run a test. Sometimes it doesn't work for the first time. There is an issue most of the time. Let's see if we actually got the test. Yes, we got the test, and it flew through the entire workflow. The only thing which we haven't told Vertical v0, and that's actually a mistake on my end, is I already configured it in the sense that the response to the webhook is already implemented, and it should just basically be displaying it once again in the Vertical v0 application. So we need to quickly basically be, once again in different words, this respond webhook gives already the output, and it should then take it back to Vertical v0. So basically the only thing I'm telling it, please wait until this particular response is coming, listen to it in the world of APIs, and then display it back as the message or the answer from the chat. Let's go back to n8n briefly. As we set up this particular analysis agent, once again, we have a system prompt. Please find that in the description. Also, you have your Anthropic Claude models set up and log in. There's a second AI agent that's completely voluntary that I came up with because I realized that this particular first agent is giving fairly complicated and unstructured answers. So this one here basically is my text assistant. Once again, it takes the input, the output of the first large language model, and I gave it again a system prompt, basically be saying, you are a writing assistant, please condense it, make it super readable, and something I also like to use is sometimes emojis. It's just a neat way, sometimes a little bit easier to walk through text. It gives you also this little bit of a friendly vibe if you talk to an AI. Fully aware, ChatGPT most of the time doesn't use emojis, but I kind of added that as well. You can use or remove it depending on your liking. Also, sometimes, since this stuff is coming, as you can see, with double stars and brackets and hashtags, it's just the format. Many of these large language models are actually communicating in Markdown. I have to tell it specifically, please do not use any hashtags or double asterisks, just actually to get a little bit of a better user experience. So that's exactly what we had told this particular second agent. As an agent itself, I'm using not Sonnet, so Claude Sonnet 4.5. Maybe I can spend some seconds also on the model choices. I use Sonnet 4.5, which is the most advanced Claude model currently on the market, also the most expensive one for the analysis task. So it spends most of the compute cost on Sonnet 4.5. It's where most of the intelligence is laying. And then in this particular text optimizer, basically, I use Haiku 4.5, which is the newest Claude model that just came out very recently. It's a little bit faster, it's a little bit cheaper, and it does the job in textual optimization. I could also be using an older Haiku model. This would also perfectly do the job. But since we're actually using the most state-of-the-art 4.5 model series by Claude, I just opted for Haiku 4.5. And as you can see here, for example, you already had a bit of a pre-example how the output could look like. It again removed most of the maybe more useless or more cumbersome to read elements, and it gave it as particular clear text to then the last component, which is, again, the respond to webhook. Simple node, just add the respond to webhook, and then once again we have to tell the AI agent on Versal v0 just to listen to this particular response. So let's see. Please analyze the following deal. Actually, of course, it shouldn't be working because I haven't executed the workflow. So let me go back and try to execute it. Please analyze the following deal just to see if it's actually walking through. We can go back to n8n and we see what is happening. So once again, Claude Sonnet 4.5 is analyzing the request. It's using its reasoning capabilities if needed. It's a super advanced coding model, of course, for this very simple task. It didn't need to be that sophisticated. And let's see what is coming. Now the actual text message came back. I'm ready to analyze your procurement deal, which again, it is actually working. We have a full integration from our agentic AI software, meaning this particular chatbot, and it goes through two large language models, first Sonnet 4.5 and then Haiku 4.5, and then it outputs it via emojis and some other output elements. The problem is it's not that super readable, so we have to again do a quick iteration because again, please verify the output coming via the webhook and optimize it for readability, as there are several elements prohibiting great UX. For example, we have this output that is sometimes coming and sometimes it already is able to justify it and just remove it in the first place. By this prompt, usually it understands, or the agent on Versal v0 already understands that yes, I probably need to reformat it. While we can also generally technically do that here in the text agent, it just gets a little bit too cumbersome. We need to do all these system prompting ongoingly, so we might as well just do it on the recipient side of things. It's a little bit of a design choices. Most ideally, you would probably do it here and you have a verification once again, and then it goes to the webhook. But I just, for the simplicity's sake, we are doing it directly in Versal v0. We can then also pre-structure it and optimize it in the first place. Now, while this is running, just one more element. These particular GPTs or these particular Claude models, they're of course not free. So on this Claude console, if you go to API keys, you will see how much dollars or how many Swiss francs or euros you actually are spending on these n8n agents. As you can see here, if you're completely new to n8n, every time we execute the workflow manually, it will just trigger it once and then it goes back to being offline. Once you put it into active, for example, and it's running on the production system, your bills might actually be ballooning in the first place if somebody is stealing your webhook. So just be aware. Try to, when you're actually building the prototype, execute it once, just see if it is working. And maybe if you actually have a client demo just for a few minutes, you might actually be putting it to active, and then don't forget to put it into inactive once again, just to not forget that your API keys or these fairly expensive API keys that lead to cloud cost and LLM compute cost are then being exposed on the internet. So let me go back here and just to see what has actually been happening for our analyst agent. I will set it up again. We execute the workflow. Please execute this deal. Let's see if it is working. Once again, we go back to n8n. It should just be running it fairly smoothly. Does the analysis, sends to the text agent. It's just ongoingly the same element, but that's basically what large language models are. They're performing the same particular job, and it more or less did it. We have a little bit of a better message. We have some emojis, and we have our first AI integration. While we are currently on Versal v0 version 8, I had some sort of more advanced iterations being done with 20 iterations. So while, again, we are leaving this particular component here, I'm quickly jumping to the second agent that I also built. Again, I will put all the prompts into the description. So let me quickly do that. And that is this particular procurement agent that again, instead of 8 times iterations, we are just now on version 21. So let me quickly walk you through how this agent is actually performing. As you can see here on the chat, I had a few more back and forth iterations. So something that I implemented that I thought is pretty unique actually is once again the AI powered search. This particular AI powered search again is consuming the procurement tender API, and it's then fetching all these particular elements. It technically also has a create workstream feature where once you have identified one of these one of these procurements, these contracts, you can then basically be just chatting if we are eligible to do that and should we continue to do it. And the AI analyst, which is the core feature of the SaaS in the first place, actually has one unique feature, and that is this particular feature where you can actually be selecting all the tenders it was able to fetch, for example, during a day. Let's say, for example, we have one tender for the University Hospital of Basel, healthcare equipment procurement, and then we can ask the chat agent a question regarding that particular one. So that's really a unique case, and that's exactly where these agentic features are coming in, where we can identify a public platform, we can inject all the domain knowledge of the public platform, meaning these tenders, into our agentic AI, and then we can use large language models to then analyze these tenders and then ideally basically be continuing and, for example, executing a proposal or a bid on these particular contracts. That's something we did as well, a little bit more than advanced version of the proposal copilot. Once again, we need to iterate over that once again. And of course, the dashboard in this particular version is also fairly more sophisticated. We have some details we can view. And again, it's all running on n8n using the exact same chain of webhook to analysis agent to text agent to then responding it back. You can, of course, extend the features of this particular SaaS fairly sophisticatedly. You can add all the components that, as we are saying, for example, auto fetch every day. It would go back to CMAP or your procurement platform, then fetch the latest. You can then, for example, use n8n as well to build the matching algorithms so the large language models know more or less what you're doing, and it would give them a scoring. The proposal copilot, once again, on this particular version 8, you can then, of course, do more advanced. You can have maybe exports into Word documents or directly into PDFs. And you can literally be iterating together with your clients and try to understand what they really need in order for them to have again an agentic AI systems for bids and public tender offers. So that's more or less it for the video. Once again, we integrated a fairly specific agentic AI workflow with a front end, again being built without code. You can then iterate with this particular one, using all the prompts here in the text. On the more sophisticated one, of course, I will put a few more into the comments for you to check out completely for free. And again, generally speaking, we can just be extending all these features ongoingly for you then to sell this particular AI SaaS to your first clients, be it in your country or actually in your region. If I added value to you, please add a comment if you have a question as well, and also like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of these videos. And with that being said, see you in the next podcast episode or in the next tutorial when we are building again agentic AI software using front end and using AI components. Take care and see you in the next one.